Hello, everyone, and thank you for tuning in to another episode of our podcast. I'm here with my dad and a guest as well. We have Jaime Diaz, the Libertarian candidate for the Texas Railroad Commission. Now, welcome to the show, Jaime. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Victoria. I appreciate y'all having me.
Yeah, of course. So there's a lot of explanations that needs to be had. Number one, Libertarian candidate. Number two, the Texas Railroad Commission. I think first we can start off by explaining what exactly the Texas Railroad Commission is, and then you can kind of tell us how you became the Libertarian candidate.
All right, great. So it's funny because most people don't know what the Railroad Commission is, right? The people that think that they know what it is think that it does railroads. But what the Railroad Commission does, it oversees oil and gas. It oversees interstate pipeline that starts and ends in Texas, and it oversees coal and uranium mining. There's currently no uranium mining, so I guess that's kind of, not really relevant. But if there were to be some that fall under the Railroad Commission's purview. So how did I get involved in politics? I actually started off going to school in DC and George Washington, and my major was international affairs. I had the ability to go work with my congressman while I was there in DC in Capitol Hill, Filemon Vela. He was actually a Democrat. So being from South Texas, I mean, I've always been a Democrat since probably about the COVID pandemic. And, when the COVID started, I had moved back to Brownsville. It was 2019, or I'm sorry, I graduated in 2019, moved back to Brownsville. COVID started in March 2020. And, I got furloughed. I was not doing anything. And a friend of mine said, hey, there's a school board election. Why don't you sign up for that? And I'm kind of like, I have to be doing something. So I figured I'd sign up. I signed up, I did that. And I ended up getting interested in libertarian politics. First off, because this issue of school choice, which I guess issue of school choice, it's through vouchers, right? So if you're not happy with the education your kid's getting in the public school, you can ask for a government voucher, use that voucher in a charter school, right? So that issue kind of started getting me interested in libertarian politics. But besides that, during COVID, I got into Bitcoin a lot. And I guess Bitcoin's founded on all these Austrian economics fundamentals, right? So the idea of Austrian economics is, a laissez-faire, let the markets be, any foreign government involvement, perverts the free market, which then lends itself towards abuses, right? So that got me involved with the Libertarian Party, or that got me involved with the ideology. I started giving the party $25 a year. So I give it $50. And someone reached out that he's not with the party, but he helps him out. Told out myself and, hung up the phone, didn't think anything of it. And I got a call 2 days later. And he's like, like if you ran for office. And I'm like, I ran for office a year and a half ago and I was miserable. Like, what position? And he was like, Railroad Commission. I'm like, look, I'm 25 years old. He's like, that's perfect. That's how you have to be. You have to be 25. I'm like, okay, but besides that, I'm not in oil and gas. And it's important, I think, to have some oil and gas background if you're going to be in the Railroad Commission. And he kind of insisted, and I'm like, look, if you find nobody else to sign up, I'll do it and I'll try my best. But find somebody in the industry, find somebody better than myself. And it ended up working out that he called me back on the 8th of December. And he's like, no one else has signed up. Will you do it? And it was one of those things that it's like, well, we've got another 11 months, right? And I said I'd do it. So I guess I could, buy some books, learn about it, engage with people. And that's what I've been doing for the past like 7 months already.
So you have made a strong case for me to vote for you because you sound like you were so excited to be a candidate for the Texas Railroad Commission. So the term length is about 6 years, which is pretty long, right? Yeah. And so you would be what, like 32? How old are you 30, now?
26.
26?
Yeah. Your math is better than 32.
Okay. I had to actually, I did the math before because I'm really bad. I actually failed math like in high school and barely got through it in college. Dad, did you have a question you wanted to ask?
Well, getting started, you talked about a libertarian candidate, and you liked a lot of the ideology. So you've kind of backwards answered my question already, but I'm going to kind of press it. As you know, libertarians believe in individual rights, a lot of choice, and yet you're running for one of the most bureaucratic positions in the government. It's elected. Most bureaucratic positions are appointed, but this is one of the few that they actually have to run for election. So what makes a libertarian decide they want to be in charge of regulating industries, especially the oil and gas industry?
Yeah, I mean, there's irony, right? Running as a libertarian for a regulatory position, right? Because I guess the whole idea of a libertarian is you want less government, less regulation. I mean, I think, or at least our campaign is kind of focused in regards to at least lessening regulation, lessening burden on entrepreneurs, on operators, right? In order to allow them to innovate, solve problems that we currently face, right? Yeah, that's not to say that we don't need regulation. We need some regulation to ensure our basic freedoms, of course, but when we do make regulation, I think it should be based more on a framework that's based on retribution. So, or retribution and restitution, right? As opposed to, command and control framework. So you could look at regulation through two different lenses. You could look at it through, I tell you A, B, C, and D, how you have to do something. And I mean, the nice part about that is if you're a big company, I mean, you can act within those parameters. You can know that what you're doing makes no sense. And if something bad happens, you could always point your finger back at the regulator and say it's their fault. And you're kind of absolved of any wrongdoing. When in reality, I think that as regulators, I think that our job is more to actually hold bad actors accountable, right? So make a mess, clean it up. If you're gonna, act in a way that's not necessarily considered towards the environment. I mean, you don't need regulations or very rigid regulations in order to, ensure that the environment doesn't become contaminated. What you do need to do is make it clear to operators that if you do contaminate, I mean, you're not going to be liable. Fine, you're going to be liable to, clean up your mess, right? You're talking about groundwater.
How do you enforce that?
So, like, for example, I went out to a ranch this past weekend. It's the Anita, the Antina. I keep wanting to see Anita, the Antina Ranch. And down there, it's a bunch of wells Chevron drilled them back, I think back in the 50s, 60s. And right now, what they found, I guess last year, was that when they're pumping water for their cattle, there was hydrocarbons in that water, right? So that means that one of the wells that Chevron drilled there, it wasn't plugged properly. So you ended up, having the mechanical integrity of the well fail. And since you've got, I guess, all this pressure down under from the earth above, you end up having all these hydrocarbons start seeping up, right? And as they start seeping up through, I guess the cracks that appear, they eventually hit your water table. And I mean, they're going back and forth right now with the Railroad Commission in regards to what can be done to remediate this issue, right? But I mean, it's simple. I mean, Chevron has to go there and clean it up. If they made a mess, I mean, it's like growing up in a Mexican household. There's a whole idea of like, mijito, limpia tu cuarto. It's just go and clean it up. And I mean, sure, the current status quo is that you slap fines on bad operators, right? But at least if you're the property owner in that case, a fine doesn't help you in regards to remedying the issue that was caused on your land.
So who enforces? I mean, you could say clean it up, but you end up in court a lot of times.
Yeah, so that's I guess the thing with regulatory bodies. They have the power of law, right? There's between regulations and laws, but I guess in regards to at least from how they're perceived by the law, they've got the same exact power. And yeah, I mean, you have to go to court. You have to first prove that it was that well that contaminated your groundwater. And then once you prove that, well, then I think the operator should be held liable for the remediation.
Okay.
It's tricky. So especially like when you're dealing with, like, let's say methane in water, depending on, so with methane, you've got a thermogenic and ambiogenic methane, right? So thermogenic is usually, or it's found lower or deeper in the earth. It's made with high pressure, high temperature. And it's chemically different than ambiogenic that's found a little bit nearer to the surface. And that's actually kind of normal to find in groundwater, right? So a lot of the times when you get people, seeing that they found methane in their groundwater, they're pretty quick to blame oil and gas operators, right? But that's not always the case. I mean, I'm not saying in the case that of the Antina Ranch that I know that it was Chevron for a fact, it was one of their wells. But yeah, like you're saying, there's a legal process, and and you've got to at least prove that, or prove who's
Yeah, you got
wrong
to show
there,
the
right?
cause, that they were the cause. Yeah, I
Mhm.
understand that.
So one of my concerns, and this is obviously probably a major concern of my generation, Gen Zers, is the fact that the environment is something that we're trying to try to rescue. We're all trying to come to the environment's rescue. We'll see it. We'll see about that. Now, I'm kind of from that perspective and coming from like these voices, flaring is actually something I learned about in research for this conversation that we're having right now. And so I have a definition of flaring somewhere. But basically it's when oil companies just like burn off gas. Is that right?
Natural gas from their
Yeah,
drilling,
natural gas. Yeah. And so there's like economic reasons for that in addition to like some other reasons. But what is your stance on flaring? And then I'll ask a follow-up question about like the regulations around flaring and especially Texas's role in that practice.
Yeah, so with flaring, it's usually an operational thing. So what happens is you're a geology guy. You find an oil prospect, you get investors together, right? You drill a hole, and you have no guarantees that there's gonna be any oil down there, right? So when you actually do hit oil, you get all these liquids coming out, right? Which are easy to store. You put them in these containers, but it's harder to store the gases, right? Being the natural gas. So what's usually done is that you start burning that gas off. And the reason that you burn it off is because it's better than venting into the atmosphere, right? Methane, I think the greenhouse effect of methane is 8 times stronger than that of carbon dioxide. So, in regards to at least addressing the issue of climate change, that's the number one thing that we should focus on, I think. And so you start burning it off, and by burning it, you get rid of about 70% of that methane, converting that to, when you burn methane, you get carbon dioxide and water. So you do this up until you're able to build out some kind of infrastructure to capture that gas and start selling it, right? That usually takes between 12 and 24 months to get systems online. The other scenario that you do have is when you're drilling wells, you're having to maintain the pressure of that formation. So you're usually injecting water or carbon dioxide down there. Sometimes when you inject carbon dioxide down, or when you inject carbon dioxide down there, you get a reaction and you end up souring the natural gas. So you'll start seeing H2S, or I think it's a hydrogen sulfide in the natural gas. And what does happen a lot is, like, let's say I have a well and I'm keeping pressure using water, right? The well next to me might be maintaining, or with their formation, maintaining pressure with carbon dioxide. My well that's being, with the pressure being maintained with the water, I'm selling my natural gas directly to a buyer downstream, right? And let's say they're using it they're using it down there. If for whatever reason some of that CO2 leaks into my formation and sours my natural gas with H2S, then my buyer will no longer take that natural gas, right? So in those scenarios, you're basically stuck between plugging your well or going to the Railroad Commission and asking for flaring exemptions, right? So you start burning the gas up until you could build a structure to, remove the H2S that's souring your gas, so that it could be sold downstream. And yeah, those are the two scenarios that I hear about for flaring.
You wouldn't think that the property owner would probably work with the next door neighbor who's pumping the carbon dioxide into the system?
So it's funny.
Do they ever mediate those kind of disputes?
So a friend of mine, actually, he works with an oil and gas company, and that was a case with him. He's with the parties. So when I signed up to run for this race, I remember I was calling all the party chairs in Texas and being like, my name's Hyman. And he ended up being like, he's like, you're at the Road Commission? I'm like, yeah. I mean, I'm not with the Road Commission. I'm just trying to say hello. And he was furious. And I'm like, what's wrong? And he told me the whole issue that he had with the well next to him, pumping CO2 and souring his own natural gas. So it's tricky because stuff that's going on way down under the surface of the earth, right? But some way or another, that CO2 was able to percolate into his formation and sour that.
Do you know if there's a cost benefit to use CO2 versus water to pressure the oil? Why they would do that?
Yeah, I can't tell you that.
Okay, I was just curious based on the
I have
conversation.
I have a question from like the environmental perspective again, is whether or not there's any alternatives. It doesn't sound like there are, but again, I'm not like in mechanical engineering or oil engineering and all that stuff.
So for flaring, I mean, the solution that I like is Bitcoin mining, right? Because what you do with Bitcoin mining is that you're running this this natural gas through a generator. If your natural gas is soured, well, then you have that infrastructure to separate the H2S from the natural gas. In the scenario that it's good, it's not soured, you could actually run that through a generator, and you're able to burn 100% of that 100% of that methane. So you're not getting those emissions to the atmosphere. And the nice part is that the systems are pretty portable, right? So let's say that I'm about to finish drilling my well. I'll know in 2 days whether or not it's going to be it's dry or if it has fluids down there. So at that point, I mean, I could call an operator, bring a mine over, bring a generator, and I mean, if it's productive, I could start burning the natural gas instead of flaring it off, right? So that's a good solution in the meantime that you're able to build out the infrastructure to actually sell that on the market.
I'm going to back up a little bit, because when you first started talking about burning off the natural gas, you said when they first pump, there's a time lag of being able to build out this infrastructure to capture it. So they have to burn it at first. How long ago did you say, how long was that time frame again?
It's 12 to 24 months.
So we're burning natural gas for 1 to 2 years
Yeah.
before we can actually capture it. I'm sure there's a lot of a massive amount of redevelopment to try to capture it right off the bat that would be involved, because obviously that would be the greatest solution to this problem, is pulling it out as first as you at the beginning.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's I guess an operate or what is it, a capital expense deal, right? So
Yeah.
you don't want to build all this infrastructure in the middle of nowhere and then have a dry well that you spend $5 million to build, and also this. So it's that's kind of the holdup. Also, you do see flaring go up whenever new wells are being drilled. So whenever you stop drilling new wells, usually flaring does go down a lot because you don't have that lag, right? So like right now in Russia, I think that they're actually flaring $10 million of natural gas per day. So it's insane.
Who is?
In Russia.
Oh, in Russia. Okay.
Yeah, it's just because they don't have the infrastructure right now to actually use all that gas.
Well, they had that problem here too. We were looking it up, and there's apparently since 2019 they're burning off 1 million cubic feet or million cubic, forget the exact measurement,
MTFs,
which is a lot of gas that could be used to, the reference was, it was like, fuel, supply 15 million households over that time period.
Yeah,
that's a significant capital investment, like you were saying, to get there, but it's also a significant gain if we could.
Yeah, that's one of the good arguments that I hear for decentralizing the grid and getting more localized power generation. So you've got a lot of end of life wells that are very low in pressure. So it's unless your well's giving a certain pressure, you can actually sell to the big pipelines. So or you can't get your natural gas in there. So you have a lot of marginally producing wells that you can't really use energy in any good way. And then we've got issues with the grid, right? With these, big choke points that if anything happens, then, we get blackouts. So that in particular, I think with natural gas and decentralizing the grid could be a good solution. I mean, I've never made an electrical power plant, so I can't tell you exactly the feasibility of that, but I think that could be a good solution for that.
All right, I think you mentioned the grid, and I think my dad has a question specifically about the grid and
well,
what
it's not
exactly
about the grid. I mean, you were here in Texas in February 21. You said you moved back in 20. And of course, one of the big problems was that natural gas was freezing, and they couldn't use it to get to the grid to fuel the electric generation. So what are you looking at to make sure that, the natural gas companies are protecting or preserving the ability to keep the gas viable during an extreme cold event?
So it's a tricky issue, I think. So at least the freezing supply chain, that was one, it was a two-part deal, right? So the first part was just like weatherization that I think I was too young back then, and either way I'm South Texas, so I guess it's not that prevalent down there, but I think that there was another freeze back in 2011.
Yeah.
That same thing happened. There was blackouts, and then the Sunset Review actually recommended the ERCOT to weatherize their utilities, right? They did nothing. So I mean, that's inexcusable. And the other side is also that whenever you get constraints in regards to your power consumption, so there's a lot of power demand and not enough supply, you'll get ERCOT doing load shedding, right? So they'll start cutting power to our house and stuff like that they consider non-critical to provide power to critical infrastructure, right? So there was miscommunication between, I guess, ERCOT, or with the Road Commission listing its critical infrastructure, oil, gas infrastructure, saltwater disposal wells with ERCOT as critical. So what also happened is, as you were getting all of this load shed because there was not enough power going onto the grid, you actually had ERCOT cutting power to some critical infrastructure like your natural gas plants. And that kind of exacerbated the issue a little bit. They fixed that. And the Road Commission has done a good job. I'll say this. They've done a good job so far in regards to not granting too many exemptions towards the weatherization requirements, right? One thing they haven't been too explicit on is in regards to actually saying what the weatherization requirements will be, right? And the other thing that they have been transparent on is regards to saying which infrastructure is actually considered critical, right? So
is that, as a commissioner, would you be supporting putting more infrastructure into that, or letting them not, I guess, the exemptions to that?
I mean, I definitely think that they have to weatherize, right? Because it doesn't make sense for it to get cold and for power plants to shut off. The thing is that I'm not sure exactly what the proper trade-off is with imposing a rigid framework and kind of just letting them, weatherize to whatever they think the best specifications are. And so I'm not sure in regards to how rigid the Road Commission should be in regards to explicit standards.
I'm going to go back to one of your arguments. You talked about, the regulatory body doing the ABCD and framing it, and then retribution if they don't do what they're supposed to do, is the two different models there.
Yeah.
How do you create retribution if they don't weatherize well?
So that was one of the issues that I had in their prior meeting, not in this last one. They set a cap at $1 million per day for non-compliance with the weatherization. And that's the whole thing. Like, I don't think that it should be kind of like like, okay, well, let's not weatherize, we'll pay $1 million and whatever, right? It's like, no, I mean, if you don't weatherize, something bad happens. I mean, you're liable for those damages. The thing that's also important, I think, to point out is with the freezes that you did have a lot of price spikes, right? So the reason you have price spikes is because you've got, or before going there, you've got the interstate and the intrastate pipelines, right? So pipelines that flow from across borders or across state, those aren't allowed to actually sell their own gas. So they're just transporters. The ones that we have here internally are. So having this in the freeze, our interstate pipeline system got cut off. So we only had the pipelines that operate internally. What then happened is that you had huge price spikes, which saw pipeline operators claim that it was because you had utilities that were buying on spot markets as opposed to on futures, right? Hedging their price long term.
You get supply and demand. That's their argument.
Yeah. I mean, that's their argument, exactly. And these companies are saying that, well, that's not the case. They did force majeure clause. That's an act of God clause, voided their hedges and made them buy on the spot. And I mean, there's litigation in regards to that. But what ended up happening is when you're a utility, you only get to charge a small margin on whatever you sell, right? When you're a pipeline, you actually do get a benefit off the price spread, right? If the price goes up significantly. The Road Commission bailed out the pipelines to the tune of $3.6 billion. And they did this by allowing them to securitize that debt that they owed to the pipeline companies that were selling them their fuel. I think in these 30-year debt slips, right? So by doing that, the utilities are able to tack that on to our utility bill. And it's funky because, you know, Chrissy Craddock, I think she owns a couple hundred thousand, not millions of dollars of energy transfers of that $3.6 billion settlement received 2.4 billion of that. So and she voted on it. And I mean, I think that's pretty inappropriate. And besides that, I don't really think it's right that Texas ratepayers are on the hook for that exorbitant amount, especially under the kind of murky conditions of it all, right?
Okay, thank you.
So this is going to be pretty much like wrapping up the interview. There was something interesting that I heard you say in like a previous podcast, and that was like abandoned wells.
Wells.
Okay, so for someone who's not familiar at all, again, with the oil and gas industry, what exactly is your concern with abandoned wells, and what is the issue exactly there here in the state of Texas?
So the issue is that in Texas, if you own a well, the last person to operate that well is liable for the plugging of the well, right? Except in a scenario that they go insolvent. So whenever that happens, then that well is transferred onto the Railroad Commission's plugging list, and the Railroad Commission is liable for plugging that well. So I mean, this is two things, right? One, before, when you plug a well, also you're stuck with that liability in perpetuity, right? So if I plug a well 50 years ago and I'm Chevron, I'm still liable if that plug jock goes bad. So one, the Road Commission kind of de-incentivizes operators from wanting to plug their wells, right? Because then that's something that they're liable for the rest of their existence. They're more incentivized to, you know, prolong the plugging till somebody wants to come along and buy that well, right? So what'll happen a lot is you'll get big operators with a bunch of wells. You'll get a guy like me that doesn't know what he's doing. And he'll be like, hey, Jaime, I'll sell you 100 wells, $1,000 a head. Like, all right, you know, I'll buy these wells and I'll start operating them, making a lot of money. And then, you know, when they run dry, you know, 1-2 years down the line, I had no idea that I had to plug them all. So this how the system functions right now is you've got blanket bonds so you've got, you know, 1 to 5 wells, you put so much in a surety bond. If you have 5 to 10, you'll put so much. So I think for 100 wells, you need $250,000, $250,000, which is like 7 to 8% of the actual decommissioning obligation of that well. So, you know, I'll file bankruptcy. I mean, the surety bond covers a marginal amount of the closures of the wells that I left abandoned, and the Railroad Commission taxpayers end up footing the bill for whatever's left.
Were you gonna? I see you
So
struggling
yeah.
there, Dad. You seem like you're wanting to say something. Well,
no,
Dad,
I was just
make it
thinking
your last question though, because we are running
yeah, I
out
had a
of
bunch of
time.
last questions, but okay, yeah.
The producer in me is coming out, so yes.
You let the producer rule here. We're going to let
Okay.
the producer rule. You finish up. Yeah, there's a bunch of follow up to that,
But yes,
that's a lot of cost. Could we not put the cost up front? Some of the cost up front when they first drill.
So I mean, I think that the Railroad Commission should require full. How do you say
As
it?
they drill,
Oh, as they drill. Well, I
or when
mean,
they first produce it and then it becomes productive.
yeah.
Could that cost be spread out more over the life of the well?
So I mean, one, you could just boost the amount that you're part of the surety bond for, right? And then 2, you can make sinking trust, right? So in the case of the bankruptcy, the Road Commission would take control of this trust and then use that to decommission the well. But end of the day, I think that I mean, the decommissioning obligation should in some form be fulfilled with something, right? Or I'm losing the word, but it's 100% decommissioning cost obligation.
It should be the taxpayers. Well, I'm starting to get into opinions. We try to avoid opinions. So I'll stop there.
No, and they should not be the taxpayers. No, they should boost the requirements to require the full bonding of the decommissioning liability. That's what I've been trying to say.
There you go. Okay.
all
All right,
right.
Miss Producer.
All right, so producer, co-host, all of the above. I'm going to wrap up this episode of This Newsletter is Political. Jaime, thank you so much for joining us on this episode. I've interviewed a lot of candidates in North Carolina, not Texas, because I covered the 2020 elections, and that was a lot of fun. So I've interviewed a lot of candidates, And I appreciate the way that you aren't sticking to like parroting talking points as much as I've heard in the past before. But that's probably because you're very, very young and new to the Libertarian Party, or not new, but you know, as a candidate, you're a new candidate. So thank you for joining us. And then to everyone else, we will see and talk to you later on this particular episode. It is a video episode. So if you want to see the video, just look at the Substack newsletter. All right. Thank you, everyone. Goodbye.